There's still confusion in Libya this morning, with both sides claiming to have made progress in their fight to control the country. Trying to make sense of what's happening, I'm joined by Nabila Ramdani, who's a freelance journalist specialist in the region. Nabila, there is a very confusing picture we're hearing this morning from our correspondent in Tripoli emerging from the country of what the developments are. Take us through what you see.
Well, very much so. The picture is very confusing because we basically have both sides sticking to their guns effectively. We have the freedom fighters who are determined to remain in control of the areas that they are now dominating, especially in the eastern part of the country. And in other parts of the country, we have more and more pro-Gaddafi supporters, but also freedom fighters determined not to give up effectively.
Now, if that pattern carries on as it is now, you have effectively a stalemate across the country, because it's a huge country, isn't it?
Indeed, Libya is a very vast country, 7 times the size of Britain, 6.5 million inhabitants in Libya, generally speaking. But I have to say that numerically, pro-Gaddafi supporters outnumber the opponents to the regime. They are concentrated in the area of Tripoli, 2 million people approximately, and in the west part of the country. So this huge section of the country are basically supportive, is basically supportive of the regime, and the loyalists are more numerous now.
And still in Tripoli, you've seen pictures of these rallies, the pro-Gaddafi rallies in Tripoli. We don't know how controlled those are in terms of who those people are and why they're there. But controlling Tripoli itself is clearly essential for Gaddafi, not least in PR terms, for the message it sends out to the rest of the country.
Very much so. Tripoli is the stronghold of the regime. The picture I get from people I talk to on the ground, I'm just back from Tripoli myself, is it has to be noted that since there has been talk about a potential military intervention in the country by Western powers, then we have seen more and more people rallying around Gaddafi because the Libyans saw it as a threat, and also they didn't want Libya to turn into another Iraq, for example. They were very suspicious of any Western interference, especially from the US. Let's not forget that US warplanes were bombing Tripoli and Benghazi as recently as the 1980s, and Gaddafi himself lost his adopted daughter, Hannah.
And just one other theme that's been emerging this week particularly is the emphasis on Gaddafi's interests elsewhere in the world. I mean, his family, for example, in this country, the emphasis on LSE, for example, about where the money from the Gaddafi family has gone and how now organisations have to account for their dealings with that regime.
Well, it's a very it's a wide network of connections that's emerging between a very dodgy regime, an autocratic regime, and indeed links with various institutions across the world, not least of all in Britain. When I met Gaddafi, he was very prompt to highlight and emphasize his relations with Britain, and indeed with Tony Blair, and senior member of the Labour Party. His son, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, is very close friends with people like Peter Mandelson, for example, or royalty like Prince Andrew. So there are very strong links, in fact, between Libya and the UK.
We will leave it there for now. I know you're going to be speaking to us a little later. For the moment, thank you very much.